Okay. Oop. So, first time trying this. Please excuse the crudity of this video and the angling and the fact that I'm wearing this giant Captain America jacket. I'm just sick and tired of watching so many things and never even trying to really play a part. So I know the video is going to be jumpy, and I'm slightly misrepresenting myself by wearing a giant Captain America jacket. This just happens to be the only jacket that I had on hand that is not covered in a work-based logo, and I don't feel like throwing my political opinions out there while visually tying myself to a company that I am about to go to and get paid to represent, which it just wouldn't be appropriate. Also, please don't take this as me making a statement that I'm one of those people that has an American flag planted firmly 6 feet up my rectum and owns a pet bald eagle in my backyard, which I have, trained to hunt down wild patriots and skin them. I'm not one of those people. I'm generally rather more pro-American than I am not. I definitely live there, and I'm very happy to live there compared to anywhere else. But it's not necessarily heaven on earth. I don't think heaven on earth really exists. Anyway, so I'm going to do this terribly, as should be expected for the first time you try to do anything. But I'm at least going to try so that somewhere out there in the world it can be said that I at least put this idea forward to be discussed. So I kind of feel for the last few years like I've had one great concept, one great idea that needs to be shouted from the heavens, and proclaimed from rooftops and drawn in sky banners so that everyone needs to be exposed to this concept, because it's the single most important thing I can imagine. It's the biggest target that I can see that we need to be talking about, and no one is talking about it at the most important discussions. And to a certain extent, that's fair, because most people think that this is a very confusing topic in the first place. But it is still overwhelmingly important. So, all right, enough beating around the bush. So, today, oh boy, here comes the polarization and the video stops. We're going to talk a bit about Bitcoin. So, people have talked way too much about Bitcoin, and that's true, but they've also not talked nearly enough about Bitcoin, and here's why. And when I say Bitcoin for the rest of this video, please understand I actually don't mean specifically the Bitcoin currency specifically. I'm referring to any of the wide array of decentralized cryptocurrencies that are currently competing in a death match all over the world and all over the internet to oust each other. So we need to talk a little bit about it, and there's a particular aspect of it that I think is not discussed nearly enough, and it is the reason I think that Bitcoin is possibly the single central issue for the world today. And I mean that literally. It is more vital to the nature of the earth than anything else we discuss in politics, be it environmentalism or the importance of equity versus liberty, or any of those other discussions, because it ties into all of them. And here's what I see. Sorry, I'm not taking too long to get around to it. Here's what I see. So, the way that blockchains work, to my understanding, as a layman who's not a programmer, but who has spent a huge amount of time reading everything that's not computer code that can be read on the subject of cryptocurrencies, I have never been able to encounter anyone or anything or any idea that disproves the following concept. Cryptocurrencies will take over the world. Period. I've never been able to disprove that. And I've tried. It's not that part of me, granted, there's some bias here, because part of me wants them to take over the world. But I'm also scared of that possibility, because the process of them doing that is going to cause a fair deal of, economic upsetness, we could say, for everyone and everything on the planet. Okay, that's a bit too broad, and it's hard to get into the specific justifications of that concept. But that's the core concept, and I don't think we're dealing with it. So let me go back and try a different tack. So here's another way of looking starting to that. Here's another way of looking at that. So we have this thing, we have this cultural norm that we call governments, and governments are, you could call them the single centralized institutions of our entire society, because they affect literally everything that everyone inside a country does, everywhere, all the time. Look around yourself right now. Look at all of the things around you and look at what you are doing right now. And think to yourself, is there anything I'm doing right now that is not somehow tied, not 7 steps to Kevin Bacon style, but literally like 1 or at most 2 hops away from a government? I'll bet you can't find a single thing. Actually, I can almost guarantee it. I mean, I'm looking around myself right now. Everything that is around me, I'm allowed to own because the government says so, and because it is legal. Well, right there, 1 hop. So they're possibly the single most primary institutions of modern day societies. And they affect absolutely everything, and what they do affects absolutely everyone. So they're the most important thing we can talk about. Now, to the extent that governments are legitimate, I've met some anarchists, and I've read some anarchist literature, and there's some reasonable arguments on both sides of the aisle to be made for the non-legitimacy of government. But to the extent that governments are legitimate, they derive their claim to legitimacy from the argument that they perform certain basic necessary functions. Which of those exactly those functions are and which ones are necessary and how necessary they are varies from country to country, but they generally fall into like protection from foreign governments, protection from I want to say border control, but I don't necessarily mean immigration. I mean what is it? Oh, national defense, that's the term. Okay, so they do. The 3 biggest ones that generally happen are national defense, arbiter of last resort, and theoretically neutral contract enforcement. And this is starting to sound really dry, but like for those of you who are, I think, a little bit more left on the aisle, contract enforcement seems like a really boring thing. Contract enforcement is an agreement, all agreements, everywhere. Not just the contract you've signed with your employer, which is overwhelmingly important to your particular life, but every single agreement that you have with another human being that involves some sort of understanding that establishes any sort of boundary for what behavior is expected between you and another human being, that's a contract. So I understand that the word contract sounds boring. Please, dear God, understand how overwhelmingly important contracts are to human life in every single aspect, everywhere, at all times. Okay, so here's the thing. Bitcoin, and more generally blockchain systems, replace one of those functions. They replace possibly the single biggest, most primary function, which is contract enforcement, and possibly they seriously disrupt neutral arbitration, which is those are the 2 of the 3 biggest claims to legitimacy that governments have. And I mean that they replace them in and I do mean that they literally replace them. They replace them in the sense of not only do they provide a system that in terms of everyday use is better, simpler, easier, more reliable, and resistant, and significantly more resistant to human corruption. And I mean, man, significantly more resistant to human corruption. They're also, to the extent that those blockchains are embraced by the populace, their edicts, the agreements that people come to on a blockchain are uncensorable by the government. I mean that to the degree that that populace is embraced by is embraced by it. So here's an example. This is one from this guy that talks about Bitcoin a lot. Most of you will know who I'm talking about immediately if you're still watching the video. You want to sell your car using Bitcoin. Okay. Well, if you and I agree that I'm going to buy your car with Bitcoin, well, firstly, that's probably illegal because we're just going to do it. And we're not going to go out and necessarily register it with the government, which in certain places of the world might make it illegal. We don't have to check with the government to do it. We can just do it. But secondly, there are no cars that do this now, but it would be very easy to implement this system in a car. It's very, very possible to build a car that can validate its owner itself via the blockchain. And therefore, when I sell you my car on using Bitcoin, okay, the way it could work is I say sell my car for this money, you send me the money, my car becomes yours. We don't even have to meet. I don't have to go get the keys. I simply park my car somewhere, walk away, and don't come back. You walk up to it, and the minute you walk up to it, the car identifies you with a number of potential mechanisms, realizes that you're its new owner, and starts up. Here's where this becomes interesting. Let's say you didn't pay taxes on that car that you bought, okay? Well, the government comes to steal your car. The government comes to confiscate your car. Sorry, didn't mean to get too anarcho-capitalist on everybody. So the government comes to confiscate your car because you didn't pay your taxes on it or register it properly. And when they do, the car says, please validate identity. And the government says, we are the government. That is our identity. Open up. The car says, that is not a valid identity. You do not have the appropriate blockchain proof of ownership. So the government says, fine, we're going to tow you away. Well, when that happens, the car bricks itself. So now, the government just spent a whole lot of money paying a whole lot of police officers and taxmen and other officials to harass a car. They didn't even get to the point of harassing you. They harassed a car that didn't care about them at all. They spent a whole lot of time, wasted a whole lot of officials' time, wasted a whole lot of the people's money trying to harass a car that doesn't care about them, and what they got out of it was a giant paperweight. Because you can set up a security system so that any device you own, especially a smart device that can access the blockchain, you can set up a device very, very easily to destroy itself. Not just to like wipe its hard drives and wipe itself clean. You can set a device to literally make itself permanently non-functional if the proper validations are not supplied. And you can tie those validations to the blockchain. And the blockchain cannot be stopped. No, it literally cannot be stopped. It literally cannot be stopped. No force on heaven and earth is powerful enough to overwrite the blockchain. The amount of computing power that would be required to overwrite the blockchain for even a single block, all right? Even a single group of transactions 10 minutes ago. I looked it up last year. It's something along the lines of, take the top 500 supercomputers on the planet, merge them all together, so now you've taken all of Yahoo, all of Google, all of Apple, all of Microsoft, and the entirety of the CIA, plus MIT and a few others. You've taken every computer they own, all of their smartest things, hooked them up into the world's most massive, overwhelmingly powerful supercomputer to ever exist, and you set it and you say, we want you to overwrite the blockchain. That computer is 0.001% as powerful as the current Bitcoin and network. So, no force on heaven and earth can rewrite the blockchain. The government, with all its power, cannot possibly do it. And it's so distributed all over the planet that the only way to wipe it from the planet is to kill all technology currently on the planet everywhere, all at the same time, and then individually going around murdering every person who has any skill in technology, computers, and engineering, and then erase all the records and make sure that it never comes back. That's the only way to kill Bitcoin. Literally the only way to kill Bitcoin. And if you don't do that, you're never going to overpower Bitcoin. It's way more powerful than anything we've ever constructed. It's a monolithic, unstoppable force. So, that being said, given that Bitcoin, to the extent that it does this one specific thing, but this one specific thing it does in a way that is 1,000,000 times more powerful than anything the government can do. It is literally beyond the reach of governments. This means that it puts us in a situation, and here's the situation as accurately as I can put it. We in the first world right now are really lucky. We have lots of technology, we have lots of amenities, we have lots of first world problems. And that's very true. There are places on the world, on the earth right now, we talk about these in politics every now and then, they come up, where people are working, 18 to 20 hours a day for 25 cents of pay for that day. They're overwhelmingly poor countries. The people that come out of there cannot survive in a first world capitalist economy because they don't have the skills. They don't have the right mindset, most of them. But they have one thing over us that is absolutely true. They are going to outcompete the shit out of us. The only reason they don't now is either they don't have access to natural resources that they can trade for outside of their own labor, or they're stuck and held down under an overwhelmingly oppressive government, or sorry, no, it's there's a third one, I forget what it is, but it's not that they cannot work themselves out of poverty. It's they just or they lack the ability to have sound money, which I guess counts as being trapped under the oppressive government, because their money's worth nothing and it devalues overnight. So you give those people sound money, you give them currency that is reliable, that holds its value the next day, that can be stored, that is confiscation resistant. Those people are going to turn themselves into first world powers overnight. And I know that may sound like a ridiculous statement right now, but it might not happen tomorrow. It might not happen next year. It might not happen in the next 5 or 10 years. But if you bring capitalism to those people, which, regardless of how you feel about capitalism at least does one thing really well. It manages to create material wealth. In fact, even hardcore communists will argue that as its negative trait. Even the most stringent of communists cannot deny that capitalism creates material wealth. They just argue that it creates too much and that it's a bad thing. So, of all the things capitalism does, it creates wealth. Well, cryptocurrencies are capitalism hard-coded in an uncensorable form, tied to the internet in a way that cannot be separated. So, the places right now that are the poorest are simply those places that cannot build themselves up out of poverty. But I guarantee you the people there will do anything, embrace any idea, any technology, and any method that they have to pull themselves up out of the hellhole that they are living in every single day. If not for themselves, then for their children. We think that we work hard in first world countries, and to some extent we do, but we have nothing on those people. Those people are insane by our standards, and they will do anything. to pull themselves up out of the muck. And cryptocurrencies are going to give them the power to do that. If you think that's insane, there are people in the cryptocurrency community who are trying to dumb down cryptocurrencies. The entire goal is to make it accessible to people in those countries. So right now, I believe last time I checked, you could take a single smartphone, and with that single smartphone serving as a somewhat centralized hub, you could empower, I think it was 100 dumb phones to run cryptocurrencies. Well, that number is going to go up as technology advances. So pretty soon, you're going to have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, maybe even 10,000 dumb phones that can now use cryptocurrency as long as there's at least one smartphone within 10 miles of them. I mean, what are you going to do about that? Nothing. And there's nothing you can do. There are places in Africa where you have African tribesmen, like that have they're living in grass huts, and they have a cell tower, a tiny little, taped together cell tower in the middle of their village, and they have that because they can check stock prices, and it can power a single dumb phone, and that dumb phone gives immense value to them. Well, now that dumb phone is a bank. And it's a bank that can't be stopped. It's a bank that can't be seized. It's a bank that cannot be erased. They can take the phone. Taking the phone won't take the money. So, all of that coming around to one final point, all right? Everything that we talk about in politics right now, whatever it happens to be, environmentalism is a really good one to talk about because there's a lot of passion on both sides of it. But it applies to absolutely everything that we talk about in politics. We will be a blockchain-based society. And as we become more and more of a blockchain-based society, the ability to confiscate and limit and redistribute personal property will become increasingly more difficult over time, nearing and verging closer and closer to impossible the more time goes on. So if you're not, whatever political issue it is that we're discussing, if you are not approaching it from the perspective of how do we solve this problem in a world where we cannot confiscate and redistribute property by force? If you're not coming at it from that perspective, you are worse than wasting your time. You are destroying your future society that you will be a part of, or that your kids will be a part of. And I say that you're destroying it because if we're not working on this now, if we're not adopting this perspective right now, we will be outcompeted. And when we are outcompeted, we will fall into chaos, disorder, and death. We will, metaphorically speaking, fall into hell. So, there's a lot of problems that we have to talk about. And there's a lot of things that we do talk about at conferences and on the internet all the time. But if we're not looking at them from the perspective of how do we address this problem in a blockchain society with all of the abilities and all the limitations that come with that, we're wasting our time. And anytime that someone's talking with you about a political topic and they don't include that as a perspective, which is nowadays 99% of the time, they're wasting your time. They're like, literally, don't bother talking to them. Everything that they think will be swept away in the unstoppable tide of blockchain technologies. It might not happen next year. It might not happen in 10 years. It might not even happen in my lifetime. But it is inevitable. And it might happen faster than we think. So we start talking about it now, or we go obsolete.